But I want to talk about the Panama Canal today because a lot of issues in the context of the Panama Canal. This is marine traffic showing you the backup on both the northbound side and the southbound side of the Panama Canal. Up here on the north, this is the Atlantic Ocean, and the south side, this is the Pacific Ocean. Not exactly, but that's basically where they link to. And what we're seeing is these long backups at the canal. And the reason for the backups has to do with water. This is the Gatun Lake water level. Now, the Panama Canal, if you ever want to read the best book on this, it's David McCullough's Path Between Two Seas. Fantastic book on the construction and building of the Panama Canal. But the Panama Canal is fed by a freshwater lake. They dam up these series of tributaries and create Gatun Lake. And fresh water is used into the locks, and they eventually spill into the north and south ends of the canal. So you've got to have a huge amount of fresh water. Problem you have right now is Gatun Lake is really low. You see it right here, August 23rd, 79.7 feet. That has basically restricted the draft of vessels that can use the big lane of the Panama Canal, called the Neo-Panamax lane, down to 44 feet. It's usually 50 feet. So you're seeing a 6-foot reduction there. Panamax, it's not really impacting at all. But what you see here is where the water levels are. And the prospective projections have water levels going back up late September into October. If you scroll down here and look at the historic levels, in August, we should be at about 85 feet. Again, we're at 79 feet. That is a big problem, which means that we're seeing restrictions being implemented on the Panama Canal, which we're going to talk about. This is the wait time on the Panama Canal. This is from Waterfront Maritime Services. This is their publication they put out. On the Panama Canal, they show you the number of vessels that are booked to go through the canal and those that are not booked. So here are the vessels that are in the queue waiting: 45 booked vessels, 75 non-booked vessels. If you're a Neo-Panamax vessel heading from the Pacific to the Atlantic, you get a 6 to 7 day wait. 4 to 5 days coming the other way. But when you start getting into the other areas, the super area and the regulars, you're seeing delays of almost 2 weeks. And in particularly where we're seeing that is in LNGs, tankers, and bulkers coming through. Those are the ones that are having the biggest problem. This article by Greg Miller over in FreightWaves, strongly recommend. Fantastic article. Greg is always a great wonk when it comes to data, and there's no shortage of it in this article. He talks about how the shipping traffic jam at the Panama Canal is not a crisis yet, which is key. It is not a crisis yet. If you start looking at it, which Greg does, he breaks it down. So one of the things you're looking at is the average number of daily transits. The Panama Canal has announced that it's reducing the number of transits down from 40 down to about 32 to 34, depending on the day. Not really impacting the Neo-Panamax vessels. The vessels that are getting impacted right now are the Panamax vessels. These are the vessels that use the old lanes of the Panama Canal. The original canal, built in 1914, has a series of 6 locks. Those locks have a set dimension. You can't exceed those dimensions. Can't be more than 895 feet long, 105 foot wide, and a draft of about 35 feet. The Neo-Panamax lane is the one that was designed in 2004, went into operation in 2016, much larger dimensions. Those transits seem not to be affected greatly. If you look at the chart here, you're looking back in July of 2021, 9.1 Neo-Panamax transits daily. It's up to 9.9 right now. But where you're seeing the decrease is in the Panamax lanes, and there's a good reason for this. The Neo-Panamax lanes actually has a water capture system that captures about 80% of the water that comes out of Gatun Lake and recycles it. The old locks don't. And so that's one of the reasons why you're seeing this happen right now. Greg also included this chart, which I think is an extremely important chart. It shows you the waiting time in days for certain vessels. And the ones to note are the red. Those are container ships. Container ships are almost not waiting at all. They're able to get through. Now, what we are seeing with container ships, and we saw a story from G-Captain about this, Mike Schuller did a great story on this, when the Evermax went through the Panama Canal not too long ago, this Neo-Panamax vessel, it had offloaded almost 1,300 containers to get its draft up so it can go through the canal. Those containers were then railed across the isthmus and then loaded back on the vessel. So while you didn't have a delay in getting through the canal, you did have a delay in that the cargo had to be offloaded and then reloaded on the other side. Where you're seeing the delay right now are in liquefied petroleum gas carriers right here, the green line, and you're seeing it in dry bulk, the blue line right here. This is where you're seeing that happen. Those are the areas where we're seeing the greatest impact. And this chart does it in bulk commodities. So you look at crude and oil production tankers. Down at the bottom, the gray is the LPG tankers, and then the red are the dry bulk carriers. This is where you're seeing the greatest amount of delays right now. So, circling back to Greg's story, what canal constraints mean to U.S. containerized imports? Well, he says it right here. It has an effect because it means you can load less on the ship, says Rolf Haben Jensen, CEO of Hauppauge Line. The effect is not immaterial, but it's also not huge. So ships are loading fewer boxes or having to take them on and off, but they're getting through. There really isn't a huge one. If you look at what a SP Global carrier source says, no issues on the U.S. coast with Panama, no impact on schedules. So container ship traffic, most of which moves via scheduled transits booked well ahead of time and given priority over other vessels, have seen delays and added costs, but did not face significant disruptions. So on the container side, you're not seeing it. But when you look at energy and agriculture, that is a bit different. And this is where we see it. Should the canal situation persist or worsen, outbound bulk commodity exports can reflow around the logjam, albeit at a higher cost in freight and time, in the same way global commodity trades have rerouted around Russian sanctions. LNG, LPG, bulk commodities come out of the U.S. Gulf Coast and they swing through the Panama Canal and head to Asia. We export a huge amount of bulk material. And this is where we're seeing it right now, particularly as it starts to head into winter. I know it's sweltering hot right now around the United States and around a lot of the places. But as we start looking at winter, this is going to be a big problem if those levels of the canal don't rise.